Please, we have nowhere to go. The words were a shattered whisper, swallowed by the roar of the wind and the relentless drumming of rain against the car's roof. The woman's voice, raw with the fear that had been her constant companion for weeks, finally broke. Her name was Sarah, and she was drowning, not in the floodwaters rising on the deserted country road, but in the cold, black ocean of despair. Her small, beat-up hatchback had sputtered its last breath an hour ago, the engine falling silent with a metallic cough of finality. Now, it was a useless metal shell against a storm that seemed to rage with personal fury. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the terrified face of her 6-year-old son, Leo, who shivered in the passenger seat, his forehead hot with fever. "Mommy, I'm cold," he whimpered, his small body curled under a thin, damp blanket. Sarah's heart fractured all over again. She pulled the useless blanket tighter around him, her own worn-out jacket soaked through. She had fled her old life with nothing but a few $100s and a desperate prayer for a fresh start. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't planned for her car to die on a forgotten road miles from the nearest town in the middle of a biblical storm. Through the sheets of rain, she could just make out a pair of colossal iron gates at the end of a long, winding driveway, almost hidden by overgrown trees. Beyond them, perched on a hill like a sleeping giant, was a mansion. It was dark, imposing, every window a vacant eye staring out into the tempest. It looked like the kind of place where people like her were not welcome, but Leo's shivering was getting worse, and his breaths were coming in shallow puffs. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Hope was all she had left. With a surge of adrenaline, she unbuckled her seatbelt. "Stay here, sweetie. I'm going to get help. I promise." She kissed his feverish brow, her lips trembling, before stepping out into the violent chaos of the storm. The wind nearly ripped the door from her hand. Drenched in seconds, she fought her way up the long, dark driveway, each step a battle against the gale. The iron gates were locked, cold and unyielding. She gripped the bars, her knuckles white, and screamed a word that was torn from her soul by the wind. Help! Inside the sprawling mansion, Arthur Pendleton sat alone in his cavernous library. At 78, he was the sole occupant of a home built for a family, a king in a castle of memories. The world knew him as a reclusive billionaire, a titan of industry who had vanished from the public eye years ago. But here, surrounded by leather-bound books and the ghosts of laughter, he was just an old man, waiting for time to run its course. His wife, Eleanor, had been gone for a decade. His son and his grandson, taken in a car accident on a stormy night, just like this one 5 years ago. Since then, the silence in the mansion had become a living entity, a constant, suffocating presence. He was watching the storm through the bulletproof glass when a notification chimed on his tablet. Motion detected at the front gate. He tapped the screen. The security feed showed a drenched, desperate figure clinging to his gates, her mouth open in a scream he couldn't hear. Then the camera zoomed out, and he saw at the broken-down car on the road a small shape huddled inside. A woman. A child. In a storm. On this night, his first instinct, honed by a lifetime of protecting his privacy, was to ignore it, to call his head of security and have them removed. It was a problem, and he paid people handsomely to make problems disappear. But then the lightning flashed again, and for a split second, the woman's face was perfectly illuminated. It was a face of pure, unadulterated maternal terror. The same terror he remembered seeing in his own wife's eyes when their son had fallen as a child. Something deep within him, a part he thought had died 5 years ago on another rain-slicked road, stirred. He took a long, shuddering breath, the first one that felt like it had reached the bottom of his lungs in years. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Alfred," his voice was raspy from disuse. "Open the front gates. We have visitors." Sarah felt the gates groan and then swing inward. She stumbled through, half running, half falling toward the massive oak doors of the mansion, which were now opening. A tall, elderly man with a kind but sorrowful face stood there, holding a lantern. "Please," Sarah gasped, tears and rain mixing on her cheeks. My son, he's in the car. He's sick. Please, we have nowhere to go. The old man, Arthur, didn't say a word. He simply nodded, handed her a thick dry towel, and then turned to his butler. Alfred, take the Range Rover and bring the boy, and have Dr. Evans meet us here. Immediately. He then turned back to Sarah, his eyes the color of a winter sky, holding a depth of understanding that stunned her. Your son will be safe here, he said, his voice quiet but firm. And so will you. In that moment, as she stood dripping on the marble floor of a stranger's palace, Sarah felt the tectonic plates of her life shift. She had been running from a monster for so long, she had forgotten that angels still existed. Leo was carried into the house, wrapped in a cashmere blanket that was warmer and softer than anything he had ever felt. Arthur, who had been a surgeon in his youth before taking over his family's business empire, checked Leo's temperature himself. A high fever, but his breathing is steady. We'll have him warm and comfortable in no time. He led Sarah to a guest suite that was larger than her entire previous apartment, with a fireplace already crackling to life. As Sarah changed into a set of soft silk pajamas laid out for her, she felt like she was in a dream. She watched as Arthur spoke gently to Leo, his hand on the boy's back, a gesture so paternal and comforting it brought a fresh wave of tears to her eyes. Her ex-husband, the man she was fleeing, had never once shown Leo that kind of tenderness. Later that evening, with Leo sleeping soundly in the massive bed under the watchful eye of a private nurse, Arthur found Sarah staring into the fire. He handed her a cup of chamomile tea. He'll be perfectly fine by morning, he said softly. Children are resilient. I don't know how to thank you, Sarah stammered, her hands warming around the porcelain cup. You don't know what you've done for us. Arthur sat in the armchair opposite her. I think perhaps I do. He was quiet for a long moment, the only sounds the crackling fire and the distant storm. I had a son once, and a grandson. He was about your boy's age. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken grief. Sarah's heart ached for him. Here was a man who had everything and nothing, all at once. I'm sorry, she whispered. He gave a sad, small smile. So am I. This house has been silent for a very long time. Too long. He looked at her, his gaze direct. You are running from something? You don't have to tell me what. But you should know whatever it is that cannot get to you here. This house, this property, it's a fortress. You are safe. The word, safe, was a foreign concept to Sarah. For the past year, her life had been a tightrope walk of fear, her ex-husband's controlling threats echoing in her mind. But here, in this quiet room with this kind, sad man, she believed it. For the first time in a long time, she felt her shoulders begin to relax. The next morning, Leo woke up, his fever broken. His eyes went wide as he took in the opulent room. Mommy, are we in a castle? Arthur came in shortly after, not in a suit, but in a simple cardigan. He smiled at Leo. I heard we have a young man who is feeling much better today. He was holding a small, beautifully crafted wooden train, its paint slightly faded from years of play. This belonged to my son when he was a boy, Arthur said, placing it gently on the bed. I think he would want you to have it. Leo's face lit up with a joy, so pure, it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. He immediately started pushing the train across the blankets, making little choo-choo sounds. Arthur watched him, and for the first time in 5 years, a genuine, unburdened smile touched his lips. The silence of the house was broken, not by the echoes of ghosts, but by the happy sounds of a living child. Days turned into a week. Sarah, hesitant at first, slowly began to feel at home. She helped in the kitchen, insisting on cooking for Arthur, simple meals that reminded him of his wife's cooking. She listened to his stories about his life, his business, his family. And Arthur, in turn, learned about her. She was a talented graphic designer who had given up her career, isolated by her controlling husband. He saw the spark in her, the intelligence and creativity buried under layers of fear. One afternoon, he led her to a dusty, forgotten room. It was his late son's art studio. Canvases and paints were covered in white sheets. My son was a painter, Arthur said quietly. He wasn't interested in the business. He just wanted to create beauty. He pulled a sheet off a state-of-the-art computer and design tablet. He used this, too, for digital work. It's been sitting here waiting. Perhaps you might find a use for it. Sarah ran a hand over the cool surface of the tablet. The idea of creating again, of having a purpose beyond just surviving, felt like a distant dream. I can't, she whispered. I wouldn't even know where to start. You start by starting, Arthur said gently. There is no pressure here. No deadlines. Just a space to be yourself. That night, she crept into the studio. She turned on the tablet, and for hours she drew. Lines, colors, shapes. It was clumsy at first, but then something unlocked. A torrent of creativity, of pent-up emotion, poured out of her. She designed, she created, she wept. She was finding pieces of the woman she thought her ex-husband had destroyed forever. The inevitable finally happened. A sleek, black car appeared at the gates. Sarah's ex-husband, Mark, stepped out, his handsome face contorted in a mask of rage. He had tracked her down. Sarah, watching on the security monitor with Arthur, felt the familiar ice of fear grip her heart. He'll take Leo, she breathed, her body trembling. He said he'd take him from me. Arthur placed a calming hand on her shoulder. He will do no such thing. He spoke into his intercom, his voice dropping into the calm, commanding tone of the billionaire who had crushed global competitors for decades. Alfred, do not let him on the property. My legal team is on their way. And call the local sheriff. Tell them a trespasser is harassing a protected resident. Mark screamed and threatened the gates, but they were immovable. Within minutes, 2 police cars and a black sedan with Arthur's lawyers arrived. Mark was served with an emergency restraining order and escorted away, his threats dissolving into impotent shouts. Sarah stood by the window, shaking. Arthur turned to her. This is the moment, Sarah. You have a choice. You can keep running, or you can stay here, and we can fight him. I have the resources to ensure he can never harm you or Leo again. The choice is yours. He wasn't offering her a handout. He was offering her a fortress from which to fight her own battle. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of strength. I'm done running, she said, her voice clear and strong. I want to stay. I want to fight. And so they did. With Arthur's legal army, Sarah took Mark to court. His history of abuse and control was laid bare. She won full custody of Leo and a permanent restraining order that made it a federal crime for him to come near them. She was finally truly free. With the fear gone, Sarah blossomed. She spent her days in the art studio, building a freelance design business that quickly took off. Her work was brilliant, infused with the emotion and resilience of her journey. But she wanted to do more. One evening, she presented Arthur with a proposal. You have so many empty properties, she said, her eyes shining with passion. And there are so many women like me, with children, who have nowhere to go. Let me help you turn one of them into a safe house. A place where they can heal, learn new skills, and start over. We can call it the Eleanor House, after your wife. Arthur looked at her, his heart swelling with a pride he hadn't felt since his own son was alive. This woman, who had come to his door broken and terrified, was now offering to build a haven for others. Yes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, Sarah, let's do that. The mansion was no longer silent. It was filled with the sound of Leo's laughter as he played hide-and-seek with Alfred, with the music from the old piano that Sarah had learned to play, and with the low hum of conversation as she and Arthur planned their new foundation. One sunny afternoon, the three of them were in the sprawling gardens, planting a new rose bush. Leo dug in the dirt with his small shovel, a smear of mud on his cheek. He looked up at Arthur and then at his mom. Grandpa, Arthur, he said, a name he had chosen himself. Can we stay in this castle forever? Sarah looked at Arthur, her eyes asking a question she was still too shy to voice. Arthur smiled, a real, deep smile that reached his sorrowful eyes and filled them with light. He reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and steady. This isn't just a castle, Leo, Arthur said, his gaze fixed on Sarah. It's a home. And a home is meant to be shared. Forever sounds like a wonderful place to start. Sarah's heart, once shattered, was now whole. She hadn't just found a safe harbor, she had found a family. She had walked through the worst storm of her life and found not just shelter, but a love built on the quiet, steady foundation of pure kindness. Sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from the most broken ground, and the brightest lights are the ones we find in the darkest of nights. If this story reminded you that kindness is the greatest refuge, please take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone who might need to see a little light today. And if you believe in the power of healing, second chances, and the families we build, please subscribe to Kindness and Love Tales. We're here every week to share stories that prove love is the most powerful force on earth.